The wind carried a chill that didn't belong to late
Troy
spring,
Bennett sat
the
in
kind
his
that slipped
wheelchair,
beneath collars
motionless
and
beneath the
stirred
misty
old
forest
memories.
canopy.
Cedar
His
Run,
face was
nestled deep in Oregon's pines, was the kind of place the world forgot. An outpost of moss, gravel roads, and old wooden cabins where time moved slower and silence stretched long. For Troy Bennett, silence had become his daily companion. The police-issued SUV crunched over pine needles as it rolled to a stop in front of the weather-beaten cabin. The engine ticked in the cool air. From the passenger seat, Troy stared through the windshield. The porch still sagged in the middle, the screen door still hung crooked, and the railing was still wrapped in the vines Uncle Ray had never managed to cut back. Everything was the same. Except him. Once, Troy Bennett had moved like a soldier wired tight with purpose, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that never missed a threat. His jaw had a natural square to it, now half hidden beneath a week's worth of reluctant stubble. His dark hair was short, but flecked with grey near the temples, not from age, but from the kind of nights that don't end when the sun rises. Now he sat in a matte black wheelchair, his legs strapped in a brace, swollen and still healing from another surgery. The chair clicked quietly as he swung the door open, his motions practiced, mechanical. No rush anymore, no sirens, no chases, just damp forest air and the sound of gravel under rubber. He rolled up the cracked stone path past the porch where summer once meant sweet tea and Uncle Ray's terrible banjo songs. But there was no greeting now, no flags waving, no screen door slamming open, just wind brushing through trees and the creak of wood settling under time. Inside, the cabin still smelled of cedar and dust. Troy wheeled through the narrow hallway, the familiar creak of floorboards under his weight. Along the walls, faded photographs hung in quiet memory, fishing trips, Thanksgiving dinners, younger versions of the people who now lived only in echo. He paused beneath one photo, a younger Uncle Ray, holding a trout with a grin too wide for his face. Guilt twisted in Troy's chest. He hadn't made it to the funeral. The fracture had kept him in a hospital bed, but the guilt ran deeper than any broken bone. A voice called softly from the back room. "You made it." Emily Bennett stepped into view, drying her hands on a faded tea towel. She was 27, petite, with freckles dusted across her nose and dark blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her hazel eyes carried something between wariness and warmth, like someone who had spent years learning how to speak to those who couldn't talk back. She crossed the room with the kind of quiet energy Troy had always remembered. Crouched slightly to meet him eye level, she offered a lopsided smile. "You look like you fought the mountain and lost." Troy gave her a small smile. "You should see the mountain." The moment stretched and then passed. She stood and guided his chair further inside. The cabin had changed since Ray died, cleaner, more organized, but Emily's fingerprints were everywhere. Folded throws stacked on the couch, dried herbs hanging from twine above the window, and dog-eared books on trauma psychology scattered beside the armchair. Troy nodded at the couch, its cushions caved under a tangle of blankets. "Still sleeping there?" Emily shrugged. "The bed feels too empty without Bailey." Her voice cracked at the end. Bailey. Her dog. A Labrador Retriever mix, 6 years old and gentle as a breeze. Cancer had taken him a month ago. Aggressive bone cancer. Too fast. Too cruel. Troy didn't press. He knew better than to prod at grief. He just nodded and let the silence grow roots. That afternoon, the sunlight filtered through the pine canopy in golden patches. Emily brewed tea in mismatched mugs. They talked about nothing. Weather, old TV reruns, the bad gas mileage on the SUV. Anything but the real reason he was in a chair or why she still cried in her sleep. Outside, the wind shifted through the woods like a whisper too soft to catch. By evening, a thin fog had started to snake through the tree line. Troy wheeled himself out onto the porch and sat for a long time, letting the air settle around him. There were no sounds of traffic, no dispatch radios, no footsteps rushing toward danger. Just him, the ache in his leg, and a strange itch in his chest, like something waiting, just out of reach. He scanned the trees without meaning to. The fog curled low, softening the edges of the forest, and then that feeling, watched. He turned his head slowly. The trees stood still, no birds, no branches moving, just quiet. But the sensation sat deep like a memory not yet remembered. It didn't scare him. If anything, it woke something old. Inside, Emily lit a fire. They ate reheated stew and talked about Uncle Ray, his ridiculous fishing hat, the time he tried to fix the porch swing and broke his wrist instead. They laughed, not loud, but real. Afterward, the cabin slipped into the kind of quiet only found far from cities, complete, thick, almost holy. That night, while Emily slept down the hall, Troy lay awake staring at the ceiling. His hand rested on his braced leg. He could still feel it sometimes, the explosion, the heat, the silence that followed. But tonight, something else filled the space between memories. Something real, something watching. Out in the forest, beyond the reach of firelight, something had waited. And it wasn't done waiting yet. The morning crept in quietly, wrapping the woods in ribbons of fog that turned the world soft and silver. From the porch of the Bennett cabin, the forest looked like it might never end, like it stretched into some other world where nothing hurt and no one got left behind. Troy sat beneath the awning, sketchpad open on his lap, pencil in hand. His fingers moved slowly but deliberately, tracing the shape of branches, the outlines of trees swallowed by mist. But he wasn't drawing the cabin or the path or even the porch where he now sat. He was drawing the tree line, specifically the place where, last night, something had stirred. His eyes kept flicking toward it, half expecting the same shadow to emerge again. There had been something there. Not just a deer or a fox, something else. He had felt it, deep in his gut. His pencil stilled. There it was. 30 yards away, standing just inside the edge of the fog, was a shape, large, still, watching. Troy narrowed his eyes. At first it seemed like a trick of light, a darker patch in the mist. But then it moved slightly, just enough to confirm it was real. A German shepherd. Massive, dense fur, mottled black and tan, standing like a statue in the haze. Its ears were erect, and its golden eyes locked onto him. Unblinking. Troy didn't move. Neither did the dog. For a long moment they stared at each other across the space between the porch and the trees. Two survivors. Two souls not quite whole. Then the dog stepped backward and vanished into the fog like it had never been there. Troy exhaled slowly. Not fear, not even surprise, just something stranger. Recognition. He looked down at his sketchpad. His hand had pressed too hard. The pencil had torn through the paper. He flipped to a new page and began again, but this time not with trees. He started with the shape of a head, the slope of ears, the tilt of the gaze. He tried to capture those eyes, amber, piercing, ancient, but no matter how he shaded them, he couldn't get the sadness right. The knowing. He didn't tell Emily. Inside, Emily moved like someone carrying a quiet weight. She wore one of her oversized flannel shirts with the sleeves rolled up, and jeans speckled with old paint and dog hair. She'd been cleaning, organizing, trying to create order where her grief threatened to make chaos. The loss of Bailey still clung to her. Not loud, not visible, but constant. She was boiling chamomile when she saw Troy's canvas jacket tossed over the back of the porch chair, the same jacket he wore every morning. She reached for it to hang it up, then stopped. There, on the shoulder, caught in the weave of the fabric, were several thick dog hairs, black and tan. Her brows furrowed. Bailey's fur had been golden and white. She ran her fingers over the threads, picking up one coarse strand and holding it up to the light. Then she turned toward the porch, scanning the trees. Nothing. When Troy came inside later, she didn't mention it. Not at first. She watched him instead. Something in him had shifted. He looked sharper, more alert, like the fog inside him had cleared a little. "You were out early," she said casually. "Couldn't sleep," he answered, not meeting her eyes. "Sketching helps." She poured the tea. "Did you see anything out there?" "Trees," he muttered. "Birds. Maybe a big dog." His fingers tensed slightly. Just the usual. She didn't push, but she didn't believe him either. Later that afternoon, she went into the back room and opened the old storage trunk that had belonged to Uncle Ray. The lid creaked on stiff hinges. Inside were wool blankets, a tangled fishing vest, and a box of fly lures. She dug deeper. At the bottom, tucked beneath a folded tarp, was what she had hoped to find. A trail camera. Dusty but intact. Emily smiled to herself, brushing it off. The batteries were dead, but she had spares. Meanwhile, Troy had returned to the porch. The forest had gone quiet again, but the image of those golden eyes wouldn't leave his mind. He wasn't imagining it. He knew dogs. He had trained with them, patrolled with them. This one hadn't moved like a stray. It had moved like it was trained. Back inside, Emily fiddled with the camera. She replaced the batteries. checked the memory card slot, adjusted the settings. Then she slipped on her boots, walked out the back door and crossed the yard to a tree halfway between the porch and the edge of the woods. She mounted the camera at chest height and whispered, "Let's see what you're hiding." That evening, the fog returned, thicker, heavier, curling like breath around the pines. Troy sat inside now, sketching again by firelight. His hand moved in slow, careful lines. Emily brought him tea and sat across from him. Her voice was soft. "You know," she said, "when dogs lose their handlers, sometimes they keep searching. Days, even years." Troy looked up, guarded. "What are you getting at?" "Nothing," she sipped, just thinking out loud. But she was watching him closely. She saw it in his eyes. He'd seen something. He just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The night deepened. Rain began to tap gently against the windows. Not loud, not stormy. Just a persistent hush, like the forest was humming a lullaby. Inside the cabin, the fire warmed the walls. The kettle hissed on the stove. Somewhere, a floorboard creaked without footsteps. Troy sat at the table, a manila folder open in front of him. The same file he hadn't touched in months, the Mission Ridge raid. He turned the pages slowly. 1 year and a week ago, a call had come in. 5 officers, 1 suspect. Routine, until a woman called about a dog barking on the upper trail loop. K9 unit was busy elsewhere. So Troy went alone. He remembered how the trees pressed in, how the barking pulled him forward. Then he'd found it. A German shepherd, caked in dust, poor-blooded, amber eyes sharp with intelligence. No tags, no vest. But trained. Clearly trained. The dog had led him to an old hiker trapped under a fallen branch. Troy called it in. The man was rescued. Then the ridge shook. The landslide came like thunder. When it ended, the dog was gone, vanished. But those eyes, he had never forgotten them. Now, staring out the window at the mist-wrapped trees, he wondered, could it be the same dog? He didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in loyalty, and he knew this. Dogs remember. The fog had clung to the forest for days now, a silver breath that curled around trunks and lingered in every hollow. The creek behind the Bennett cabin murmured quietly, swollen with spring melt. The sun, hidden behind thick cloud, cast no warmth, only the idea of light, just enough to make you forget it was still cold. Troy Bennett wheeled himself out the back door without a sound. Emily was deep in conversation on a call with a client in Colorado, helping a woman navigate the trauma response of a service dog who'd stopped eating. Troy knew he had at least 30 minutes before she noticed he was gone. The trail was soft beneath his wheels, pine needles damp from the mist. He made his way to the edge of the forest, the same place where the shepherd had stood before. He didn't call out, didn't whistle, just waited. Then, from the mist, like an echo stepping out of memory, it appeared. The German shepherd. Towering, regal, black and tan fur damp with fog, streaked with the pale grey of age. His eyes, amber, gold-ringed, locked onto Troy. He stood motionless, so close Troy could see the moisture on his nose, and yet far enough to vanish in a heartbeat if he chose. Troy extended a hand, palm open, still. A signal from old canine seminars, an invitation without pressure. His breath hitched in his throat, but his hand didn't shake. The dog moved forward, 1 step, then another. His movements were measured, deliberate, like a soldier advancing into uncertain territory. Then he stopped again, just shy of Troy's reach. "It's you, isn't it?" Troy whispered. The shepherd tilted his head slightly. His ears perked, but he didn't retreat. Troy felt something rise in his chest, something heavier than hope, older than joy. It was recognition, shared survival, a memory without words. Neither moved. Then the dog turned and melted back into the trees. That night, Emily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, wrapped in a blanket, laptop open, the trail cam footage finally loaded after an hour of wrestling with adapters and an ancient SD card reader. The screen flickered with grainy black and white night vision. A deer wandered by at 2:01 a.m. A rabbit darted past at 3:08. Then, at 3:41 a.m., Emily froze. The shadow appeared beside a still, familiar shape, Troy's wheelchair. The dog stood inches away, poised like a statue, head high, eyes reflecting the faint glow of the infrared light. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even looking at the camera. He was watching the forest, guarding. At 3:49, he vanished out of frame. Emily replayed it. Then again, she zoomed in on the clearest still. The shepherd's fur was thick and slightly matted, a nick in his right ear, muzzle flecked with grey. but what caught her breath was the posture. It wasn't a stray's wariness. It was a guardian's stillness. She whispered, "Troy," but he was already asleep in the den. His head tilted to one side, arms folded. The sketchpad had fallen from his lap, open to a page filled with repeated drawings of the same eyes, the same tilt of the head, the same golden ring. She didn't wake him. Instead, she saved the still to her phone and typed a quiet note beside it. He's watching him like he remembers. At dawn, Emily made her way to the trail where she'd seen the shepherd in the footage. She laid out an offering of kibble and jerky, not bait, but a gesture, a sign that they welcomed him. Later, when she returned to the porch, Troy was already there. Same spot, same gaze into the trees. He looked up when she approached. "I saw him," he said simply. "I know," she replied, handing him the phone. The morning air clung with damp weight, hesitant between winter and spring. Light dappled through the pine canopy, and for once the woods behind the cabin didn't seem haunted, just waiting. Troy returned to the creek trail where the dog had stood. It had been 3 days since their last encounter. He didn't expect anything, but he hoped. Then something caught his eye. Off the trail, near a tangle of thick roots. The soil there looked disturbed, darker, recently turned. He wheeled closer, reached down. His fingers dug into soft earth until they struck metal, cold and rounded. He pulled it free, brushing away dirt. It was a collar, thick leather, aged and cracked but intact. Attached to it a brass tag, worn but legible. K9, Ghost, Unit 47, Jackson County. The name slammed into him like thunder. Ghost, not just a dog, not just a visitor, a K9, with a unit, a history, a purpose. He remembered those eyes now, clearer than ever. 6 years ago, Mission Ridge. The dog who had led him to the trapped hiker before vanishing in a landslide. Everyone thought the dog had died, but Ghost had survived. Somehow, he had ended up here. Troy clutched the collar tightly and turned toward the woods. "Ghost," he said aloud. From the brush, a rustle. No shape emerged, but something was listening. Back inside the cabin, Emily sat at the kitchen table in her usual work-from-home outfit, old jeans, warm socks, a hoodie once her father's. Her glasses slipped down her nose as she typed. On her screen was the face of Marcus Glenn, African-American, clean-shaven, late 30s, sharp eyes behind a journalist's tired smile. "Marcus, I need a favor," she'd said earlier. "K9 Unit, Jackson County, Unit 47. Name was Ghost." Marcus had leaned back in his cluttered office, bookshelves stacked high, a guitar long untouched. "Ghost?" he repeated. "That's a name I haven't heard in a while." "You know it?" He nodded slowly. "I covered a rescue story years ago. Snowstorm, landslide, Mission Ridge. 3 hikers trapped, 2 K9 handlers went in. 1 didn't make it, the other barely got out. The dog, Ghost, vanished. Everyone thought he was buried." Emily's voice dropped. He wasn't. Marcus blinked. "You're saying Ghost is alive?" "He's here," she said, watching Troy, protecting him. Marcus rubbed his chin. "That's unbelievable." "No," Emily corrected. "That's loyalty." He promised to dig through the archives. Before hanging up, he added, "If that really is Ghost, your cousin's sitting next to a legend. That dog didn't just track. He chose. Made decisions like a person. That kind of intelligence isn't trained. It's lived." By the time Troy returned, dirt on his sleeves and the collar in hand, Emily already knew. He placed it gently on the table. "I found this buried by the creek." Emily reached for it, fingers trembling. "He's not just a ghost," she whispered. "He's a survivor." They sat in silence, the collar between them, a thread between past and present, between loss and return. The storm came without warning, crawling over the Oregon sky like an old wound reopening. By early evening, the clouds had thickened, dark and bruised, casting the forest into a tense hush. The wind surged through the pines in bursts, snapping branches, bending trunks. The scent of ozone hung in the air, sharp, electric. Inside the Bennett cabin, Emily moved room to room, lighting the last of the lanterns. The power had flickered twice already. She checked her phone. No service. Her eyes drifted toward the window. The forest had turned to a blur of movement and shadow. Rain streaked the glass in angry sheets, wind howling like something alive. She called out, "Troy?" No answer. She turned sharply. His wheelchair wasn't in the front room. Panic pinched her spine. She grabbed her coat, flashlight and boots and bolted into the storm. Outside, the wind hit like a wall, flattening her breath. Trees swayed like giants, their limbs clawing at the sky. Rain stung her cheeks as she stumbled toward the back path. "Troy!" she screamed. No reply. Branches whipped past her. She slipped once, gashing her knee on a rock, but pushed forward. Her flashlight beam wavered through the downpour, slicing through the darkness. Then she saw them. Two shapes at the edge of the slope above the creek. Troy's wheelchair lay tilted in the mud, one wheel spinning helplessly. He was half submerged, body twisted awkwardly at the edge, braced leg dangling over a sharp incline. But he wasn't alone. Ghost stood over him. The shepherd's body was rigid, muscles taut, planted like a living anchor. His front paws dug into the earth inches from Troy's shoulder. His chest pressed firmly against Troy's side, holding him steady, resisting the pull of gravity and slick mud. Troy's voice was raw. He's holding me. Emily dropped to her knees beside them, arms sliding under Troy's shoulders. "Okay, I've got you," she whispered. Only then did Ghost shift his weight, easing back, just enough for Emily to pull Troy farther from the edge. They collapsed together in the mud, breathless. Rain soaked through their coats, but none of them moved right away. Troy's jacket was smeared with dirt. Emily's hands trembled. Ghost stood silently beside them, soaked to the bone, but unmoving. His gaze never left Troy. Emily turned slowly and knelt in front of the dog, her voice caught in her throat. "Thank you for coming back." For the first time, Ghost blinked. Then he sat, still facing Troy, tail curled around his paws. A sentinel. They didn't speak on the way back. The storm still roared above them, but beneath it, something quieter passed between them. Trust, maybe, or something even deeper. By the time they reached the porch, the power had returned. Light spilled from the windows. Emily led Troy inside, his arm looped around her shoulder. Ghost followed close behind, dripping but proud. Inside, the fireplace glowed, casting flickers of warmth across the floorboards. Emily guided Troy to an armchair, his hands still shaking. She didn't say a word as she retrieved a towel from the bathroom, then knelt beside Ghost. She worked slowly, wiping dirt and leaves from his thick coat, careful with every stroke like she was cleaning something sacred. Ghost didn't flinch. He lay beside the hearth, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Emily never looked away. Neither did Troy. That night, nothing was taken by the storm. Something had been returned. The morning came quiet, the kind of calm that follows fury. Pale sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the mossy ground in golden slivers. Birds resumed their cautious calls. Inside the cabin, the air felt different, still reverent, touched by what had happened. Ghost lay on a folded quilt near the fire. His rear right leg was wrapped in a makeshift splint, supported by towels, gauze, and a broken wooden paint stick. Emily had worked through the night after noticing the limp. Ghost had taken the full force of Troy's fall, using his body to keep him from sliding into the ravine. But he had never cried out, never whimpered. Only when they got back did Troy realize something was wrong. Ghost had simply lain down slowly, as though finally letting exhaustion catch him. Now Troy sat beside him, one hand resting gently on Ghost's back. He could feel the heartbeat there, steady, strong. Emily returned from the kitchen with a thermos of warm broth and a small bowl of shredded chicken. She knelt beside Ghost, eyes red from lack of sleep but movements precise. Ghost sniffed the food and took a piece gently between his teeth. "He's still got his appetite," Emily said quietly. Troy nodded. "He took the whole weight of me and didn't make a sound." Emily checked the bandage. "That leg took the worst of it. Femur, maybe. I called Doc Leland." She cleared her mourning. The Cedar Run Veterinary Clinic was nestled between the town's barber shop and a dusty old garage. A squat white building with green shutters and a wooden sign that read Animal Care since 1982. Inside, the walls were covered in photos, thank you notes and newspaper clippings. One showing a younger woman cradling a litter of flood-rescued puppies. That woman, now in her 50s, met them at the side entrance. Dr. Helen Leland. She wore her grey hair in a tight knot, and her posture carried the kind of strength forged by years of delivering calves in blizzards and stitching up coyotes by flashlight. Her eyes went immediately to Ghost's limp and the splint. "What happened?" she asked. "He saved my life," Troy said quietly. She nodded once. No further questions. Inside the exam room, Ghost stood shakily and allowed himself to be lifted gently onto the low table. Emily kept a hand on his side the entire time. Dr. Leland worked with calm precision, palpating, scanning, murmuring to herself. Then she turned on a handheld device, waved it over Ghost's neck, and waited. Beep, she paused, eyes narrowing. Microchip. She turned the device so they could see. The ID flashed onto the screen. K9, Ghost Unit 47, Jackson County Search and Rescue, handler deceased. Status, retired, presumed lost. Dr. Leland let out a breath. Well, that answers that. Troy stared at the screen, voice low. It's really him. Emily's hand froze on Ghost's fur. She whispered, all this time, he wasn't lost. He was waiting. Dr. Leland pressed gently on the injured leg. Mid-shaft femur fracture. Clean, but painful. I can splint it properly, prescribe meds. He'll need 6 to 8 weeks of rest. No stairs, no chasing threats. She gave Troy a pointed look. Understood, he said, then resting his hand on Ghost's head. We'll take care of you now. By the time they returned to the cabin, word had already spread. Marcus Glenn's article had gone live on the Cedar Run Sentinel's website. The Guardian in the Pines, K9 Ghost Lives. The story traced Ghost's final known mission 6 years ago, his presumed death and miraculous return. A photo accompanied it, Ghost resting beside Troy's wheelchair, leg wrapped, posture alert. That evening a car pulled into the driveway, then another and another. People stepped out silently, many holding candles. One man, Cliff Harmon, limped up the porch stairs carrying a glass lantern. I was one of the hikers, he said, voice trembling. He found me in the snow. I never thought I'd see him again. He knelt beside Ghost, who lifted his head just enough to meet his gaze. Thank you, Cliff whispered. You brought me home. He placed the candle on the porch railing and lit the wick. By nightfall, 8 candles burned along the porch. Mason jars, simple glasses. Quiet beacons, not of mourning but of gratitude. Inside, Troy sat by the window. Ghost rested beside him, leg elevated. Emily stood behind them, arms folded, overcome with emotion. Troy looked down and whispered, You never stopped being a protector. And even now, wounded and still, Ghost's tail gave a soft, steady thump. A year had passed since the storm. Since Ghost had anchored his aging body against the weight of a man slipping toward death. Since rain carved scars into the hillside, and the forest whispered its secrets into the ears of those still willing to listen. Now the woods surrounding the Bennett cabin wore winter's soft cloak again. Snow clung to the pine branches in silent heaps, and the ground was padded in white. But something had changed here, something that went deeper than season. The cabin was no longer just a place of refuge. It had become something more. Above the porch, mounted carefully between beams of reclaimed wood, hung a hand-carved sign, Guardian Pines. The letters were bold but smooth, sanded with intention and care. Beneath that sign, Troy Bennett sat in a sturdy chair with titanium-rimmed wheels and smooth pivots. The sun slanted low behind the trees, painting the sky in amber and steel. A sketchpad rested on his lap, a pencil held loosely in his fingers. His hair was a little longer now, his beard trimmed close. Though pain still echoed in his legs when the cold set in, he moved with practiced ease. Beside him, stretched across a woolen blanket on the porch, lay Ghost. The shepherd had aged in the past year. His fur had grown greyer around the muzzle, and the once torn ear drooped a little more than it used to. His back leg, the one fractured during the storm, still bore the memory of that night. But he had learned to walk again, slow and measured, each step like a story written into the earth. Troy looked down at his sketchpad. He had drawn Ghost again. He often did. Not as he had been at his strongest, but as he was now, aged, resolute, majestic. Every line held meaning, every shadow, reverence. Behind them, laughter echoed through the trees. The training yard behind the cabin had been carved from a wide clearing. Fenced in with care, it now served as both sanctuary and school. A handful of volunteers, young vet students and recent animal behavior grads, moved through agility stations, recall drills, and quiet bonding time with the newest residents of Guardian Pines. A golden retriever named Roscoe, blind in one eye but brilliant at scent work, bounced between cones. Nina, a black lab who had once sniffed bombs in overseas deployments, watched the younger dogs with a calm authority. And Dex, a skittish Belgian Malinois, once terrified of every loud sound, now trotted across the yard on a lead, tail wagging slightly. Emily Bennett stood near the fence line, clipboard in hand, her braid tucked beneath a wool cap, red flannel shirt tied around her waist. Her movements were efficient, but her smile had softened since that stormy night a year ago. She had become the heart of this place. Her old grief, sharp and raw when Bailey died, had settled into something quieter. Bailey's worn leather collar now hung from a post near the porch, surrounded by pine cones and smooth river stones, a quiet tribute. Ghost lifted his head and watched the field. His tail thumped once. The younger dogs followed his gaze instinctively. If Ghost rose to investigate a volunteer, they followed. If Ghost laid back down, they relaxed. He was no longer the strongest or the fastest, but he was their compass. Hannah, a tall, freckled volunteer just out of vet school, walked past with Dex on a leash. She paused shyly at the steps. "Hi, Ghost," she said gently. The shepherd's tail tapped twice against the wood. She smiled, then turned to Troy. "We ran recall drills today. Dex didn't bolt once." "That's progress," Troy said, nodding. "How's he doing with the crate?" "Better," she replied. "Still howls sometimes, but not for as long." Troy smiled faintly. "Give him time. They don't just need space. They need patience." She nodded, then led Dex back to the yard. Troy glanced at Ghost. "You did that, you know." Ghost didn't move, but leaned a little heavier into the porch rail, eyes scanning the tree line like he always did. Dusk settled in, turning the sky a bruised silver. The volunteers finished their routines, filed inside for dinner. Emily returned to the porch carrying 2 mugs of tea, one for herself, one for Troy. They sat on the steps, steam curling from the mugs. Ghost settled between them, his body warm against their knees. "I didn't think it would work," Emily said quietly. Troy looked over. "This place?" She nodded. "All of it. The program, the dogs, you." He smiled. "Me least of all." "But it did," she said. "You made it matter." He shook his head. "We made it matter. All of us. Him, most of all." Ghost lifted his head, ears flicking. His eyes scanned the horizon. Still guarding, still watching. Troy followed his gaze toward the yard. Solar lanterns lit the paths now. Small doghouses lined the fence like miniature cabins. Each dog had a nameplate, a bed, a place that belonged to them. "You know," Troy said, his voice lower, reflective, "back when I was still active, they told us not to get too attached to our dogs." Emily didn't interrupt. She just listened. "They said they weren't pets, said we'd have to let them go," he exhaled. "They were wrong." She reached out, resting her hand gently on Ghost's shoulder. "We don't leave our own," Troy continued. "Not them. Not anyone." Above them, the wind stirred the branches. Ghost's ears twitched. He didn't rise, didn't bark, but he was listening. In the quiet space between past and future, between scar and healing, the cabin stood steady, no longer just a shelter. Now it was a beginning, a promise. A place where no one would ever be left behind. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with fanfare. They come on 4 legs, cloaked in mud and silence, worn by time and scarred by survival. Ghost had always been such a miracle, quiet as breath, steadfast as the trees. The final days of winter melted gently into spring. The forest surrounding Guardian Pines sighed with renewal, buds on branches, rivulets of snowmelt whispering through the moss, and a softness in the air that hadn't been there months before. Sunlight filtered through pine needles in golden ribbons, and somewhere a bird called out as if announcing something holy. Inside the Bennett cabin, the air still carried the scent of pine wood and something else, something reverent. The chaos of the previous year had faded into rhythm. The people and dogs who lived here had formed something beyond routine. It was purpose. It was peace. Ghost lay curled on a quilt near the fireplace, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The leg he had injured that stormy night had never quite healed to what it once was. But then again, neither had Troy, and neither of them needed to. They were whole in other ways. Troy sat nearby, sketchpad on his lap as always. His drawings had shifted over time, not just the sharp lines of memory, but fuller portraits, scenes that captured the sanctuary they'd built together. Today he was drawing Ghost again, not as the strong K9 of his past rescues, but as he was now older, slower, but no less magnificent. There was pride in every pencil stroke. Across the cabin, Emily entered carrying 2 mugs of tea. Her movements were fluid, calm. She had settled into her role as the heart of Guardian Pines with the grace of someone who had found what she was meant to do. Her clipboard was never far, her flannel always tied around her waist, and her gaze constantly scanning the field for both dogs and humans in need of a gentle word or a firmer hand. Outside, the yard pulsed with new life. Nina, Roscoe and Dex all moved freely in the training area. The younger volunteers, some just out of school, others still finding their path, worked side by side under the soft command of Emily and the silent authority of Ghost. Ghost had become something of a legend among them. They watched how the other dogs reacted to him, how Roscoe instinctively paused when Ghost did, or how Dex followed his gaze toward the trees like he understood there was still something to guard. Even the new arrivals sensed it. They took their cues from the old shepherd, his movements fewer now, but no less deliberate. Hannah approached the porch with Dex, now much more confident, tail up and steps sure. "Hi, Ghost," she greeted softly. The shepherd lifted his head, gave 2 gentle taps of his tail against the porch. She turned to Troy. "Dex went through the crate door without hesitation today." Troy smiled. "Good. And the barking?" "Almost gone. They always bark less when they believe they're safe." She nodded, understanding more than just the words. "Thank you for this." Troy didn't respond, just looked down at Ghost. That was answer enough. Later that evening, as the sky faded into a dusky blue, the sanctuary glowed under the soft light of solar lanterns. Small wooden doghouses lined the fence like cabins, each personalized with names burned into signs: Max, Bailey, Zeke, Rosa. The pines beyond stood tall and patient. Emily and Troy sat on the porch steps, sipping tea as the last light of day slipped beneath the treetops. Ghost lay between them, his body warm and steady, his gaze fixed outward as if still standing watch. Emily's voice broke the silence. "I didn't think it would work," she said, barely above a whisper. Troy turned to her. "This place?" She nodded. "All of it. The program, the dogs, you." He smiled faintly. "Me least of all." "But it did," she said. "You made it matter." Troy looked out over the field, at the figures of volunteers guiding retired K9s through careful exercises, at the gentle glow of lanterns along the trail, at the way Ghost's ears still twitched with every shift of wind. "We made it matter," he said. "All of us, him most of all." Ghost lifted his head one more time, as if acknowledging the words, before lowering it again to his paws. Troy stared out into the pines. His voice was low but firm. "You know," he said, "when I was still on duty, they told us not to get too attached to our dogs, said they weren't pets, that we'd have to let them go." Emily didn't reply. She simply placed her hand on Ghost's back. "They were wrong," Troy said. "We don't leave our own, not them, not anyone." Above them the wind rustled through the branches. Ghost's ears flicked, but he didn't rise. He was listening, always. They sat like that for a while, 3 souls bound by shared silence, by fire and storm and something deeper that didn't need words. Behind them, inside the cabin, the fire crackled. The soft sound of laughter filtered out through the window as the younger volunteers gathered for dinner. The aroma of stew and fresh cornbread filled the air. Troy looked once more at the sketchpad in his lap, then at Ghost. He wasn't just a survivor, he wasn't just a dog, he was a guardian, a guide sent not by chance but perhaps by grace. And in a world where people are too often forgotten, veterans left behind, animals discarded, hearts broken and bruised, Ghost had returned not for glory but for purpose. Not to remind them of what they had lost, but to show them what could still be found. As night crept in, Troy leaned over and whispered, "You kept watch when no one else did. You came back when I thought no one ever would. You reminded me, purpose doesn't end with pain." Ghost gave a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. His tail thumped once against the porch. The stars began to emerge above the pines. And in the hush that followed, between the breath of trees and the pulse of memory, Guardian Pine stood steady. Not just a shelter, but a promise. A place where healing was real. Where loyalty lived on, where no one, man or dog, was ever truly left behind.